Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Vasco Pedro, who is the co-founder and CEO at Unbabel. Hey, Vasco, how are you doing?
Great. Adrian, thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
You're very welcome. Now, Vasco, for the benefit of our listeners and people that read the highlights, can you tell us a little bit about you and about yourself, and also a bit about the work that you do at Unbabel?
Sure, happy to. So I am originally from Portugal. I have been passionate about language and AI since I can remember. I grew up, my mom's now retired, but she was a professor of English linguistics. And so language was kind of, part of our house from the beginning. And I did an undergrad in artificial intelligence, so major in artificial intelligence with a minor in computational linguistics. And then I did my master's and PhD at Carnegie Mellon in natural language processing. Since then, I've been doing mostly startups where I'm by applying AI to different problems in NLP. And in 2013, along with my co-founders, I started Unbabel. And my co-founder and CTO, João, also has a PhD in machine translation from UPenn. And so we share this massive passion on what we're seeing as fundamental problems with, that could be solved by artificial intelligence in language. And we happened to start working in this particular problem in a time that, a lot of times you need a bit of luck. And I think when we started working on Babel was really when machine translation started being useful in the sense that if you were to take the output of a machine translation engine and put it in front of a human translator, if 3 years before they would have just erased everything. Mm-hmm. And when we started in Babel, it just happened that it was useful enough that post-editing started making really sense. And so what we were seeing is, well, if you think from the perspective of what is going to be the impact of AI across different tasks that humans do, translation is one of the oldest tasks that humans do. And every time you need a trade, obviously since the beginning, somebody needed to figure out how to communicate. And so, but until now, it's been a predominantly human-driven approach. Mm-hmm. And so when we started thinking about this as well, what's the next iteration? Because machine translation by itself definitely at the time was not going to cut it, but at the same time was creating a lot of value. And so what we set out to do is say, well, can we create this hybrid model that really leverages the benefits from both sides, the scalability and productivity of machine translation with the quality of humans. And when we started looking at this and the applications of problems, we actually realized that this enabled a new way of doing things, and that in itself created a lot of opportunities in a real problem out there, which is when companies scale and they start going into new markets, inevitably they have to deal with new languages because
Hmm.
people in those markets speak new languages. And the challenges actually happen across the entire organization. And typically, what we've seen in localization until now has been mostly catered to marketing and product. It's how do I translate my website, my marketing
Sure.
content, and my product manuals, etc. But the challenges exist across the entire organization. You have the same challenge in customer service, for example,
Hmm.
where in order to serve customers in their languages, it's logistically very complex. You end up having a large operation. There's a lot of downsides, and so we started looking at this from a more holistic perspective of, okay, well, what are the new ways that we can enable companies to seamlessly scale across languages by leveraging this platform that combines artificial intelligence and humans. And we started by focusing on customer service.
Okay.
So that's kind of where our beachhead is, and that's what we've been focusing for the last few years.
Nice.
How do we? Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's great kind of background. And so I'm interested in actually kind of how that works, because you talk about you describe what you do as AI powered, human refined translation as a service. And you're talking about talking about applying it in the provision of great customer service. I mean, what I'm wanted to understand is like, how does it actually kind of like work? And where does it work kind of like best, as it were? Because I'm just like, wow, how does this work? Am I talking to something or somebody through an interface, of a smart interface, or how does it work?
So when you're scaling a customer service department across languages, it ends up being a pretty strict variable, in the sense that you end up having to hire. Until now, the solution was really, hey, go and hire people that speak the language, right? And this creates
Yeah.
a lot of issues in terms of scalability, in terms of efficiency of use of workforce, but also it means that you're bounded by the language capability. So instead of having to organize your team maybe by product lines, or really focusing on who is the best customer service agent and who
Mm,
has the best understanding of the product, a lot of times you end up being limited by, I actually need people that speak this language, which is not very common. So I'm very limited in my choices. What Unbabel enables a company to do is to do away with all of that, right? So it's saying, look, take any of your agents, just focus on hiring the right agents, the right people with the right knowledge and the right mindset for customer service. And then what they do is we integrate directly with the CRMs that agents use, so Salesforce and Zendesk and Dynamics and a
right.
bunch of others. And then the agent has a very seamless native experience as well. So right now we're focused on non-voice, so email, chat.
Hmm.
And whenever there's a contact from a customer, let's say in Chinese, by the time the customer service agent gets that contact, it's already translated into English. Let's say the agent replies in English just as they would normally, and the customer gets it in the native language, so in this case Chinese, right? And the whole process is very seamless. We sit as a layer in between that makes sure that communication happens in a very high quality means, without any of the parties necessarily even having to know that they're talking to someone that doesn't speak their language. Usually the agent does know, but it's very seamless. And so this means that as you scale, it gives you a new way of thinking about multilingual customer service,
Right.
because you can centralize either in a near shore or offshore. You can organize teams according to product lines. It leads to much lower turnover. You can be much more efficient, and then there's a lot of benefits that you get from that. So one, much more cost effective. Two, actually a much higher customer satisfaction,
Hmm.
because typically this leads to much shorter turnaround times of time to first response. And also because you have agents that tend to be more knowledgeable about the product, you end up having a shorter time to ticket resolution. And
Mm.
so you have a better experience for your customers, and it means you can handle any language right away, right? Without, like, you enter a new market or you want to open up your customer service to any language, it's the same, like it's super seamless.
Okay.
And you do that at a fraction of the cost, right? So which obviously is very appealing.
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, I mean, I think it's, the whole idea is wild. I think it sounds great. I mean, But in preparing for this interview, you also mentioned that this concept of language operations, and is that does that allude to this idea that this has applications beyond kind of like service and actually can that and therefore it's service is the beachhead, but actually the application is kind of like way beyond that. Or I mean, am I getting that completely wrong? So can you maybe
No,
explain
that's
to me the kind of the concept of language operations?
certainly. So the insight, there's a bit of an insight that the localization as we were perceiving it until now is really focused on two silos, two sub problems. Typically, as I was saying, marketing and product.
Sure.
But this problem applies to the entire organization, right? And so when you think about, okay, how do I solve the language scalability problem on customer service, or if you take sales, it's even worse, because typically you end up excuse me, you end up having to hire people that not only speak the language but a lot of times are on location, right? So
Uh-huh.
there's like zero solution. Or even internally, I mean, even if you take a company like Unbabel, we focus on eliminating language barriers. We still need to hire people that speak English inside the company, otherwise we can't work together, right? So
Mm.
access to global talent becomes very language dependent. And so the idea here is, what we're seeing is AI is enabling us to use translation, in conjunction with human translation, but to use translation to tackle all of these problems. And when you think about it from that perspective, it's a bit the change that happened from sysadmins to DevOps,
Right.
where or with marketing ops, where suddenly you're thinking not so much on a task inside a silo, but on a strategic function that enables all of the other functions of the company to scale across languages. And so, as part of the Unbabel solution, what we developed is a platform to deploy, manage, and scale language operations inside a company. We started by customer service, but now we're expanding into other use cases.
Okay.
And so there's the language operations is an evolution of localization, and LangOps as a job role takes what typically you find inside localization, but also adds the AI component and the ability to think strategically about how to deploy AI and human translation across the enterprise to enable that scalability across languages.
Perfect. Wow. Um, it does remind me that there's this odd reference, which I'm not sure. I think we talked about this before, but it's not related to the name. But there's a reference in a Douglas Adams book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Yeah,
where
Babelfish. Yeah.
the Babelfish, which is the universal translator, you put a fish in your ear and somebody else does the same, and then you can just talk to anybody from anywhere speaking any language. And
Yeah,
it's
and,
like,
and actually, Adrian, I think I want to say we're 15 years away, 10 to 15 years away of that being true. Not with the fish, but with an implant, right? I
yeah,
think so. When I think about what's happening now, what's happening, 5 to 10 years and afterwards, I think right now we're seeing, the direct application of, well, one, the conversational interfaces that were starting being pretty popular in the last 2, 3 years,
hmm,
but also starting to extend into voice with Alexa and other services like it.
yeah,
And I think that will play a big role in customer service in the next, 2, 3 years. I think 5 to 10 years is when we're going to start seeing things like the rise of AR and VR and the ability to do customer service almost in person across devices like this. And language is going to be a big part of it. So if you're interacting in AR and VR with someone, suddenly you don't have any physical barriers. And not only that, but you have the sense of being physically near that person. Language becomes even more obvious barrier, right? And so solving that, I think, is going to like interfaces that through AR and VR that enable you to speak in any language. I
yeah.
think that's going to happen. And then after that, what we're seeing now is very early signs of brain to computer interfaces, like Elon Musk Neuralink and Facebook neurophotonics, and they're just starting. But I think in the next 10 years, we're going to start seeing a lot of progress towards those direct interfaces with your brain. And in the next 10 to 15 years, you'll have something like a Babel fish, but it happens to be an implant that enables you to speak any language, either voice or text.
Wow, bring on William Gibson's cyberpunk out of
Yeah.
Neuromancer.
Yes, exactly. Neuromancer is one of my favorite books.
Yeah. I mean, I love that book too. I mean, I think the idea of it is kind of quite wild, particularly when he wants to become an art history expert, given the case that he's working on, so plugs in a chip. So effectively a USB port on his neck, and then he becomes an art history expert. It's quite wild, the very idea that.
Jules Verne used to say that the laws of imagination have to obey the laws of the universe, and the corollary of that would be that anything that you're able to imagine means that it's possible to exist at some point.
Yeah.
And I do think that we're just notoriously bad at timing it when it will happen, right? We usually either overestimate or underestimate.
Yeah.
Point case, where's my flying car? I mean, according to Back to the Future, that should have been happened already. But in other cases, we also underestimate, right? And I think I don't know if it's when the right timing is, but I 100% believe that will happen. I think the merger of AI and human is going to be very interesting to watch in the next 15 years, because it's going to create drastically going to amplify human capability from a cognition perspective, and in things like that. We're going to see things that are going to look and feel like telepathy, or things that would have been completely magic 15 years ago.
Wow. Well, let's kind of watch this space. So tell me, I'm interested in, if we go back to how you describe yourself as AI-powered human refined translation as a service. I mean, how does, a two-part question, I guess. How does the human refined element work? And then also, just to give people a sense of the quality we're dealing with here, how does the results from the technology stack up against, say, a multilingual support or service team? Demand and capacity kind of aside, just kind of thinking about quality.
Mm-hmm. Of course. So the nuts and bolts of it. So if you have from the solution, you have the portal, and you have a bunch of other bits and pieces. But if you look under the hood of the actual pipeline of translation, right? How does text come from one side and emerges on the other? What happens in between? And there's a number of stages, but the core ones are the first thing we do. So we take especially we deal with enterprise and very sensitive content. So anonymization is key to us.
Yeah.
We have a very, very sophisticated anonymization pipeline that scrubs any PII data. And typically also PII data is stuff you don't want to translate anyway. I mean, like numbers, addresses, names, things like that. There's a lot of tricky bits there, because if you replace a name with another name, it has to be semantically equivalent. If you do male to female, then translations might be all wrong. Yes. So there's a lot of stuff there. But then after that, what we do is we actually have machine translation engines that we've built and are customized with the brand and content of our customer. And so it's basically an engine that's continuously learning how to be better at their voice and in the glossary words they use, and the terminology that is adequate and specific for customers. Mm-hmm. And so based on that model, you have an initial translation. And then we have a module called quality estimation, and we're pioneers in this. And what it does is a neural network-based model that tries to make a determination on whether we're very, very certain that is absolutely correct, or if it needs some human intervention. Right. And if it needs some human intervention, it gets sent to our community. So we've built over the years a highly curated community of individuals, of translators, that then are constantly online and taking these tasks. And they get a text that needs to be refined, and then the interface itself that they use to do that is powered by AI, where, for example, it will be highlighted maybe parts that we think, hey, we're very certain that this is correct, but here's another bit that we really need you to focus, and oh, by the way, make sure that the tone is this and that, and so it really helps also the human to refine the output, right? And then after this, it's when the message gets sent, at the end of the pipeline. And so the process, depending on size, let's say a typical email would take 5 minutes, including the human component. So you're adding 5 minutes of lag, but typically it's not an issue in the case of emails. And then in terms of the linguistic quality, it's actually a lot of times better than the native agents. And part of it is because a lot of times the agents that you hire aren't particularly great at writing.
Right. Okay.
Right. And so you basically decoupling the problem of someone that understands the product and the procedure and what they want to do with someone that is actually really good at writing and understands language, right? And so a lot of times the quality ends up being better than native. or at least the same level, right? And then what happens is, we do think that linguistic quality ends up having a good impact on customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
But the gut feeling is that what data is indicating is actually that the majority of the impact comes, positive impact on customer satisfaction comes of the speed, right? Because before you had maybe, let's say you had 3 Germans and 2 French, right? And they had to take the queries as they came, and maybe one of them was sick and the other was on vacation, and so you're limited on the bandwidth. But now, once you, instead of having that have 5 agents, right, your ability to handle messages becomes, you end up having higher bandwidth overall,
Sure.
and so you end up having a much faster time to first response, and that has a very positive impact.
Cool. Um, that's very cool. I mean, it also kind of reminds me of the idea that you've got actual translators, pool of translators or network of translators that are working to this. It sort of reminds me of I watched something the other day which was about film scores and how they've been a boon for the employment of orchestral musicians.
Yeah.
And it's almost, it feels like a similar sort of thing. It's like word for word translation is not necessarily a dying art, but it's quite an old kind of industry, and this is almost like a new avenue for many translators, like for they can put their skills to use.
Definitely. And what we're seeing is, this is not a one size fits all in terms of the use case. So if you look at something like chat, right? So chat
Mm-hmm.
has very strict requirements of real time, and so there, humans are still in the loop, but they're tasked with continuously translating uh, data so that the engine is improving really, really rapidly. And
Mm-hmm.
so then in production, it's AI driven because of the need for immediacy,
Mm-hmm.
but also conversational chat tends to be simpler in terms of the linguistic quality of interaction, so we can achieve those levels of result. But when you go to emails, for example, as soon as you have multiple sentences, humans are completely key. And then if you go from there to, let's say, FAQs and knowledge bases, you not only need one human, but you need translation and revision. And if you go into something like an ad or something that is highly creative, you start dealing with transcreation, which is like machines can't really do that. And so
Sure.
there's all these ranges, right, that have a different amount of human effort involved.
Yeah.
But it's really on, you can look at it from 2 perspectives, right? Which is, one is, the machine is continuously, AI is getting better, and it's picking up the low hanging fruits of different things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
But also that means that from a different perspective, you're increasing the the productivity dramatically for humans, right? Because
Yeah.
a human before could do 300 to 400 words an hour in translation. Now at Unbabel they do 3,000, right? And so that means that their value creation goes up, which means that they not only can work on things that are more interesting
Mm-hmm.
for them, but those things also have higher value, and so that
Yes.
means they can actually earn more, which
Yeah.
is which is particularly good.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. So, Vasco, this all sounds. I mean, I'm sure everybody's finding this kind of fascinating, but it's. I guess it would become a bit more grounded if you could maybe give us a couple of examples of firms that are adopting this approach, and what they've done, why they've done it, and how they've kind of benefited, just to bring the whole proposition to life, as it were.
Yeah, so like some of our customers, like Logitech, Microsoft, Wargaming, Booking.com, like we have unfortunately few customers that we can't really talk about, but
Sure.
a lot of these customers, especially large customers, end up having similar paths, and maybe Logitech is a good example.
Okay.
Because they were very typical of what was happening on digital businesses in the global pandemic, unless you were travel. But like Logitech, everybody was buying cameras, everybody was buying devices at home,
Yeah.
microphones and whatnot, and so they saw 300% increase in ticket volume. And what they were able to do is they increased staffing by 45%.
Mm-hmm.
Spending was flat, and they were able to handle not only 300% more tickets, but also one, raising NPS scores by 58 points, and at the same time cutting ticket response times to 12 hours from 48 hours
Right.
that they had before, right? And so for them, it was really about continue to enable flexible and remote and hybrid work in their workforce,
Mhm.
and being able to handle this spike in volume without having to have an equivalent spike in heads, right?
Right.
And so this is typically what we see with the companies that use Unbabel, right? So they uh, the ones where we see the biggest impact, they already have a fairly sizable customer service operation,
Mhm.
and what we can help them is really not only optimize that tremendously, but as they scale, and especially in crisis moments like what was happening during the pandemic, they can do it much easier, much more seamless, and then they get the benefit of actually increased customer service, increased customer satisfaction.
Yeah. Perfect. Um, and I know you mentioned kind of voice earlier on about the intelligent voice assistants. I mean, it seems to be, and this is all very text-based now. I mean, is there any plans to extend your technology to voice? Because that feels like a natural progression, given that we're
Uh,
also talking about the Babelfish as well.
yeah, so we've started looking previously at understanding better how voice models, because there's a natural fit with saying, look, let's say we want to do transcription, right?
Yeah.
And we can do voice models where we do speech recognition and use humans to correct that speech recognition, have a similar model than
Yeah.
what we do for text. The
Also,
challenge
we
with
speak
voice,
differently to how we write as well. I guess that's an important kind of thing to.
yes, yes. And at the time, so we haven't fully invested in it because we need to be, well, for some reason. One is because we have kind of our hands full,
Yeah.
and
Well, there you
so
go.
we need to focus. But also because we need to be very confident that we can provide the level of quality in
Mm,
real time for voice. Voice has to be real time, and the experiments we've done so far, it's not at the level that we needed to do. So
right.
I think we're going to see. I think WebEx just announced that they're a partnership with, I don't know exactly who because I haven't said it, but they're launching a feature to do, when you're talking to someone, have automatic transcription.
Right.
Um, but that needs some visual cues. We started looking at, which is very cool. We did this demo with voice morphing, which was, it looked very sci-fi. The idea was, we trained a speech recognition engine, but we would then refine it by having a bit of your voice, for example. And so
Okay.
when you would use that speech recognition and speech synthesis, so not in the recognition, but in the synthesis part is when you use like the model of your
Hmm.
voice. And so let's say the engine was English to Chinese, you would speak in English and you would sound Chinese, but you would sound like you in Chinese, right? Which was really cool. But
Right.
which is actually what you want, right? It's like I want to. It's a part of that. Like I don't want to sound like a robotic voice in another language. I want to sound like me in another language.
Sure.
The challenge with that is that it's very, very computational intensive, and so it's not quite ready for prime time and to be able to scale it. But I think it's inevitable that the translation layer will also include voice, and I think LangOps, will require voice to scale customer service
Y-
across the entire span. So
Yeah, and I can imagine it's almost a bit like, again, it's a bit like, you know, you see on the news when people are at international conferences and you have banks of translators doing simultaneous translation, how that can possibly be enabled to allow everybody to converse around on one topic but not be limited by their language skills.
and if you've I don't know if you ever conversed through a translator, through an interpreter.
No,
uh, it
not
is a it
not
is a
really.
weird experience.
Yeah.
That's been the other thing that from a product perspective we haven't, like, no one has quite cracked, right? Which is, um, there's a delay, right? So
Mm,
you and I are talking, and before you finish talking, I'm already processing what you're saying. I'm thinking of, there's already responses. So there's a flow that, a very natural flow to a conversation. But when you have an interpreter, you're saying something that I don't understand what it is,
yeah,
and then he or she says that thing, and then so it really disrupts the flow of conversation.
sure.
um, and so it needs to be, from a product perspective, from a tech perspective, it needs to be really well done, because I need to be able to only hear you in my language and not hear the original and then the translation, and then so
Yes.
there's a few kinks still to work out.
Yeah. So you have to separate. You're almost listening to the tone and then waiting for the words to come through. So it's all kind of a bit, I don't know, piecemeal or episodic. I don't know what the right words. Yeah, this did almost fractured in many ways. Is a
Yes, and the challenge with language is it's a stream, right? You're saying something, and you could potentially say a word at the end of the sentence that would change the entire meaning, right?
yeah.
Even if something as simple as something not, right? And as a
Hmm.
joke or humor, and so speech recognition engines kind of have to wait for the whole sentence to be said before they can process it.
Sure.
So there's a lot of tricky bits there in order to have it actually sound natural and nuanced that you can have a conversation. So there's the technology is getting there, product is starting, but we're still a few years away of having a solution that, even if you discount quality itself, that the interaction would be natural and seamless.
Yeah. So Vasco, the if I was to ask you, I mean, I know you talked a little bit about the future and the capability that's coming towards us, or we're moving towards. I mean, but if I think more broadly about service and experience, I mean, what from your perspective are you seeing as being some of the big challenges that lie ahead that companies need to tackle if they want to deliver on some of their promises around delivering better service and experience?
I think one of the big challenges right now continues to be accessibility,
Right.
accessibility to users, and especially we were seeing this, being affected during the pandemic by the lack of resilience of existing solutions. So entire
Hmm.
contact centers shut down because of COVID, and suddenly, like things are overwhelmed. But also there's more of a different perspective, which is there's a certain inequality of customer service that is highly dependent on language. Like
Mm,
something as simple as, if I call British Airways on the English line, you have 24/7
right.
support. But
Yeah.
if I call it on the Portuguese line, that's 9 to 5, 5 days a week, right? And this is a simple example, but
Hmm.
the more if you're in a developing country, your ability to get good customer service is even worse.
Hmm.
And so I think there's and I can understand from a language perspective until recently, because it is very complex to be able to serve a bunch of different languages. And so it had to be a very conscious effort. And by the time you were actually enabling equal amount of, like, the equal level of service across languages, it meant that you were a big organization with a large to be able to provide coverage. That's not the case anymore, right? I mean, like with Unbabel, for example, I mean, there's no reason for you to segregate some of your users or customers just because they don't speak English or your core language, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's still very much a challenge, and I think it's the one that we can actually solve, right? And I think that raising the level of customer service and providing a customer experience that is equal, independent of language and location, it's much closer now, right? I mean, you still obviously you still have issue of coverage of hours and so on, but
Hmm.
I think it's doable and it's solvable, and it's solvable in a practical and pragmatic way. So I think it's an immediate challenge that we can tackle. I think as people, and we'll see what happens after COVID, but right now there's a much higher permeability on working in a place and living in a different place, and like where you work and where you live are almost two disjoint things.
Hmm.
And as that happens, um, how do you deal with that from a customer experience, right?
Hmm.
Because if I'm used to a certain environment in the US and now I move to Mexico, how do I transfer that relationship with me wherever I go? I think that and before we were thinking, well, no, I'm on vacation, so it's okay, or there's a short trip. But now, as that becomes part of the normal life, and we see, well, there's no physical barriers anymore. I think we're going to be less patient with the artificial physical barriers that are going to continue to exist at some level.
Yeah. Nice. So, I mean, so we've talked about a lot in all of that. And what I also like to do, just to try and keep things kind of like simple, is to ask everybody when I talk to them is also to boil it down to um, some almost direct advice or direct instructions for people that are interested in wanting to improve the service or experience they deliver to customers. And I ask them, so what would be your best advice? What would be the one or two things that you say, this is what I believe you should do, and it will help you deliver better service or better experience to your customers? What would you say, Vasco?
People expect more and more local support. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to them in their language. Right?
Mm.
It's very important that you talk to your customers in their own language. It has a huge impact in creating trust and satisfaction. Obviously, we're here to help with that. There's a solution for it. It's actually will save you money and will create a better experience. That's one. The other is in doing that, it frees you to do something that I think is also important, which is restructure your customer service teams across product lines so that you have experts that know the product thoroughly and intimately, because that leads to a much better experience to your
Sure.
customers.
No, that's great advice. I mean, it's like push the expertise as close to the front as you possibly can. Don't
Yes,
make customers work to get the help that they really need.
exactly.
So before I, excuse me, before I wrap up with a couple of fun questions to the end, I mean, Vasco, that's been great. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add or highlight that we've missed out before I ask you my fun two last questions?
No, this is a lot of fun. I'm very curious about the last question.
So for the last 18 months or so, on the back of me writing a book called Punk CX, I've been asking people on every interview that I've done to do almost to answer a couple of almost like word association or kind of quick fire kind of questions. And it's almost like an ongoing piece of social research to try and understand what Punk CX means to different people. So the first question is, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
I think I would pick vulnerability.
Okay.
The we are all going through something that nobody in the world has gone through before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think brands recognizing that, things sometimes, went unexpected, and being vulnerable about, hey, this is new for us too. And, I think that creates a strong connection to
Yeah.
customers. Um, and I was thinking about brands that have been doing that, like some of the airlines. I thought it was very interesting where, and I saw a big difference between, airlines like Virgin or EasyJet or some of the European airlines where they had a much more vulnerable approach of, hey, we're trying our best. This is really affecting us. We're going to do what we can. But versus US airlines that were much more, this is how it is, like they were much less empathetic to the
Right.
problems, and they wanted to cover the issues with with this pretend that no, we know what we're doing. This is planned.
Okay.
And I think that turning on its head and saying, look, sometimes as customer service we don't know, like we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
A bit like it comes along. I think it's an evolution of Zappo's philosophy of like the
Yeah.
customer, like just really helping the customer and being on the customer side,
Hmm.
which I think has a huge impact in a situation like a pandemic.
Perfect. I love that vulnerability. I think it's a great word. I know that we don't have that on our list because our list is quite long, but I really like that one. So thank you for that. So if I was to kind of to push you and say, well, what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of, well, maybe that ethos or just a more just general kind of punk approach to the experience it delivers? What would you say? If you used to pick one brand or something.
I would pick Zappos. I know they're now part of Amazon, but also Tony Hsieh died, not so long ago,
Rest in
and I
peace,
think it
Tony.
was, yeah, and I think it's he brought a level of passion to customer service that really kickstarted this whole trend. And I think he with the whole holocracy that they were experimenting inside. I think there was a big effort on vulnerability on, hey, we're experimenting, we think this is going to work and it's going to be better, and but we're not quite sure. And I think that Zappos, in terms of customer service, still is a beacon.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So Vasco, that's all I have for today. Just want to say that's been awesome and super interesting and exciting and all of that. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your time and your experience and your insight with us. That's been super cool.
Thank you, Adrian. This is really great. I really liked it.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.